I'm really not that impressive, you know. I mean, I'm so always impressed when people read out all of these things I'm supposed to have done, but it's, well, I'm not so sure that I'm justified in getting that accolade. So, are we going to get my display? Oh, good, thanks. So what I want to talk to you about today really is what I call just sustainability. And the just sustainability, I want to unpack it a little because I've rethought about the way I want to structure this. And so to me, a just sustainability is about how do we reimagine quality and equality, so the play on words there, while we live within environmental limits. And in my presentation, I don't want to give you the impression that just sustainability negates environmental sustainability. I see them as partners, and that's really the message I want to give. For those of you who can see the picture, I do apologize for the arrangement of the screens here. It wasn't my choice. For those of you who can see the picture, that picture really reminds me that we can reimagine the way things are. That's Broadway in New York. For those of you who know, Broadway is being reimagined and is being pedestrianized, is being made more people-friendly. And I think the message that that picture gives me is, let's not think about what is probable, let's think about what is possible. And in that vein, I want to begin my presentation. So, it's twee to start with Gandhi, but be the change you want to see in the world. My question is, are we really being the change that we want to see in the world? So the campus, the conference is about campus initiatives to catalyze a just and sustainable future, or just and sustainable world. But I looked at the AASHE Digest 2009, 380 pages, over 1,250 stories and initiatives from nearly 600 institutions, 24 chapters, and the word justice appears 13 times. 6 times in relation to curricular matters, once in relation to a leadership centre, once related to a book, once for a committee, once for a student coalition, twice for faculty jobs, and once in an inauguration speech. And I was actually really pleased about that inauguration speech. If there's anybody from Santa Clara College here in California, you know, thanks for your president's acceptance of my work. He talked in his inaugural speech about the need to move from an environmental to a just sustainability. As an academic, that's really nice when at least one person picks up your ideas. So my question then is, are we modeling on campus the spirit of this conference? Are we modeling a just and sustainable world, or are we modeling on our campuses a green world? Because the two are very different. So in the next 40 minutes, what I want to show really is that we need to move, and why we need to move as a global society, from an environmental to a just sustainability. And I want to give you 3 concrete ways we can activate Gandhi's statement by moving our campuses towards this ideal of a just sustainability. So let's look at the problem, because again, this conference is about not just the United States, but it's about campus initiatives to move towards a just and sustainable world. So I've long been interested in social justice and green movements, and my first quote there was from a paper I wrote in 1988 in the UK. This social justice perspective must be included in green campaign agendas because short of coercive measures, true environmental well-being will only exist when there's human well-being. I truly believe that to be the case. We will only have human well-being we will only have environmental well-being when there's human well-being. We can't separate the two. I was doing some research in 1990 in the UK, and I interviewed Greenpeace UK, asking them, did they think, as a green campaign organisation, social justice was important? And they said, and you can laugh or you can cry at this, equity, it's not an issue for us, we're here to save the world. Now, I mean, what a bizarre thing to say. But the point is, beneath that message, I think, is something true about the environmental movement generally. The environmental movement believes, as we are saving the planet for everyone, then we are being equitable. And we don't need to look inside ourselves at our movement, at who we are, to say, are we really being equitable? Are we representative of the planet as a whole? In 2003, myself, Bob Bullard and Bob Evans really nailed down this quality, environmental quality, human equality link a lot more. And we said that the issue of environmental quality is inextricably linked to that of human equality. Wherever in the world environmental despoilation and degradation is happening, it's almost always linked to questions of social justice, equity, rights, and people's quality of life in its widest sense. Let me give you some thoughts about that. If you think about the countries in the world with the strongest commitment to social justice, measured in terms of access to healthcare, in terms of women in parliaments, in terms of educational standards, and in terms of the gap between rich and poor, those would be the Nordic countries, Finland, Sweden, Denmark. They're also the countries with the strongest commitment to environmental protection. I'm not saying there's a causation here, but there is a correlation, it seems to me, between the way we treat people and environments. The countries that are at the bottom of the pile in terms of social justice, Zimbabwe and other countries, are often the countries that are trashing their environments. There's a link between environmental quality and human equality. How do we deal with this in the US? Well, we have two separate paradigms, very separate. The sustainability or green paradigm on the one hand, and the environmental justice paradigm on the other hand. Let's look a little bit more at the sustainability paradigm. In my journal, Key Warner in 2002, and the data has changed slightly since 2002, but you'll get the message here. Key found that more than 40% of the largest cities in the US had sustainability websites, but only 5 of them had environmental justice as a mention. San Francisco, Austin, Albuquerque, Cleveland, and Seattle. Only 5 US cities made the link between sustainability and environmental justice. My colleague at Tufts, Kent Portney, in his superb research, said most cities that have sustainability indicators do not explicitly use social or environmental equity. A disjoint between sustainability and justice. And that's not what Brundtland imagined when she defined in 1987 the sustainability paradigm. That's not what was imagined. We have separated these issues out for a whole variety of reasons. On the other hand, then, we have the environmental justice paradigm here in the US. My colleague and myself in the UK in 2004 decided that really what EJ is a vocabulary. It's at the activist, at the local level, it's a vocabulary for political opportunity, mobilization, and action. But at the government level, it's also a policy principle that no group should be disproportionately disadvantaged. Now, we have these two paradigms then, sustainability and environmental justice, and they operate largely separately. Some of you will remember the early 1990s, the angry exchanges between leaders of the environmental justice movement and the Big Ten in terms of our people are not on your boards, you're not hiring our people, why should we get involved in your campaigns? Things have got better since then, but my question is there a middle way between these two paradigms? Is there a just sustainability? And let me just level with you on the reason why I'm thinking about this a lot. I am the chair and the head of a planning school in Massachusetts. My students, master's students, go into planning and public policy as professions. What I'm noticing is that there is less of a discourse at the planning and policy level around environmental justice. It's being dropped because it's seen as an activist agenda, it's seen as an agenda that policymakers and planners don't necessarily want to get involved with. It'll still happen at the ground level as people get more and more angry about what's happening in their neighborhoods, but as a policy and planning discourse, it's not happening. In Massachusetts, it's being reinvented as green jobs, green-collar jobs, the Van Jones kind of stuff. That's what environmental justice is being sort of remodeled as. So my thought then, as a pragmatist, is, okay, if we can't get the justice in through environmental justice, let's tag it on, rewind. No, let's not tag it on to sustainability. Let's rethink sustainability, take it back to its roots, and put the justice within sustainability, hence the concept of just sustainability. Okay, so what I had my students do is a quick analysis of 30 of the top environmental organizations in the United States. This was way back in about 2003, 2004. What we were looking for was evidence in mission statements and in programs of organizations, evidence of the words justice or equity, and no mention of equity or justice in the mission statement, no programs related to equity or justice. 3 was that the core mission statement had intra- and intergenerational justice or equity in the mission statement, and there were substantial programs related to to just sustainability. So, here's the results. And again, apologies for the fact that a lot of you can't see this. Let me just go to the chase. That index, the Just Sustainability Index, goes from 0 to 3. The organization that used to be called Center for a New American Dream, but is now called New American Dream, had a Just Sustainability Index of 3. Mission: New American Dream helps Americans consume responsibly to protect the environment, enhance quality of life, and promote social justice. That is just sustainability. National Audubon Society, Audubon's mission is to conserve and restore nature, natural ecosystems, focusing on birds, other wildlife, and their habitats for the benefit of humanity and the Earth's biological diversity. So that didn't score. It had no programs that actually were focusing on equity, justice, as such. We had people like the Sierra Club that were progressives. They have an environmental justice committee. They have been thinking since the 1990 exchanges with the EJ movement. They've been thinking about how do we better represent America and Americans today in terms of our programs and our policies. And then the Wilderness Society, they got a 1. They have a program taking inner urban kids out to wilderness areas. But let me give you an organization then that actually really lives this notion of just sustainability. And this would be Urban Ecology in Oakland, California. Have a look at the mission statement. Urban ecology has not focused on the traditional environmental priorities of preserving land, air, and water. Neither have we had a traditional community development focus aimed at, for example, generating affordable housing. Rather, our work has integrated elements of these disciplines and others with healthy human habitats as the common denominator. My point is, healthy human habitats, that's a just sustainability. And so I leave you with a question there. Can we model our campus sustainability organizations on urban ecology? Can we get our campus sustainability organizations to think about not just the green issues on campus, but the other issues that contribute to a healthy campus? And that's where I want to go really in the rest of my talk. But I just want to finish that set of thoughts by thinking about those 2 paradigms again, sustainability and environmental justice. And what I'm trying to think here is, what about coalitions? What about working together? Can we work together? And I found some very good evidence in the book, Sustainable Communities and the Challenge of Environmental Justice, of just that. Those kids with their face masks on are from an organization called REAP, the Roxbury Environmental Empowerment Program. Roxbury is a neighborhood in Boston, predominantly a low-income neighborhood of color. Asthma levels 5 times the Massachusetts average. I won't go through the usual stats, but everything that you would expect happens in Roxbury. More violence, higher joblessness, etc., etc. So those kids, masks, if you can see, it says fresh air. In Roxbury, there were 11 Massachusetts Bay Transportation Authority bus terminals, diesel bus terminals. 11 in that one district. Maybe, just maybe, that's something to do with the asthma levels. Anyway, I'll leave you to think about that. But they were involved in a school project to look at asthma. And they got so riled about it that they decided to go and talk to the MBTA chair, they talked to the Environmental Protection Agency, they talked to the then governor of Massachusetts, Paul Cellucci. And they pulled a campaign together. And what they did was they pulled a campaign together called Clean Buses for Boston. It had blue blood environmental groups, the Conservation Law Foundation, it had the Sierra Club, it had Alternatives for Community and Environment, it had all kinds of social justice groups. Why did they come together? Because it was a winner. Clean Buses for Boston. Nobody could deny that it was a good thing. And so maybe this is the point about coalitions. Maybe the future of those two paradigms lies in bringing together coalitions where everybody agrees. You don't need to be ideological bedfellows. Those organizations in Boston aren't, and they still aren't. But the 350 compressed natural gas buses on the streets of Boston today are there because those kids wore those masks and went and did what they knew was right. The other possibility, as suggested by Luke Cole and Sheila Foster in their 2001 book From the Ground Up, is this idea of movement fusion. Could these two movements be brought together? There's a lot of evidence that the intentions of the environmental justice movement and the sustainability movement are similar. There's a lot of bridge building to be done. And I think those bridges are being built at the local level. For instance, in Boston, the local Sierra Club chapter works arm in arm with the environmental justice organizations in Boston. At the local level, it's easier to do this kind of thing than signing up to these platforms at the national level. So maybe the idea of coalitions and movement fusion is a way of bringing together these seemingly disparate organizations with different agendas. So let me define then a just sustainability. The need to ensure a better quality of life for all, now and into the future, in a just and equitable manner, while living within the limits of supporting ecosystems. 4 pillars of a just sustainability: quality of life and well-being, intra- and intergenerational equity, socially just allocation of the goods and the bads of our society, and living within environmental limits. So again, I emphasize, a just sustainability is not negating the idea of living within limits. In fact, I would say it has a stronger appeal to the notion of limits, because some of the people that are living with less are some of the very people that we would want to protect within a just sustainability. So let me just give you, and obviously I don't have the time to go through all facets of a just sustainability, but I want to give you 2 particular aspects. One is called this idea of environmental space, and if you can see the diagram there, it has an idea that there is a theoretical consumption space called the environmental space. The lower level is what I call the dignity floor. If we allow humans' consumption to fall below that dignity floor, which is about the $1 a day United Nations minimum, we cannot guarantee their dignity nor their quality of life. And if they fall too far below it, then they die. Okay? None of us are anywhere near that. We're at the top level there, overconsumption. We are several planet people. We're not living one planet lifestyles, which is what that theoretical consumption space in between the dignity floor and what I call the profligacy ceiling is. So, the idea then of environmental space is that for about 10 or 15 different resources, which make up 90% of our resource use, we could actually have a fair shares model. We could, and the way that it's worked is that a theoretical population of, say, 10 billion in 2050, every person on the planet would have access to 1/10 of the world's resources. Access to, but not an obligation to use. So this model then, this fair shares or per capita resource allocation model, is really trying to get us not to, that will never happen. We know that will never happen. But discussions about consumption in the future on a global basis are going to need to start somewhere. And I'll tell you where they're not going to start. They're not going to start with the statistic 4.5-25. That's what's happening at the moment. We, 4.5% of the world's population, called Americans, are consuming 25% of the world's resources. That's, for me, the most dangerous statistic on the planet. Not global terrorism, our out-of-control consumption. India, China, Brazil, Russia, Iran, the big emerging powers are not going to let us do that for much longer. The beginnings of a just sustainability globally will be started around a per capita resource allocation strategy. Whether it be carbon rationing, which will come down the pike eventually, or whether it's just about our resources. So then, if in 2050 you're allocated 1/10 of the world's resources, you just multiply up the population of your country by that, and you have a fair shares allocation of resources for your country. India and China will be allowed to up their consumption. We will have a drastic reduction in our consumption, so that our consumption equals 4.5% of the world's resources. Again, it's the beginning of a discussion. I apologize for the fact that these targets are in black. This shows my technological inadequacy. I couldn't manage to get my keynote here to change them into white. But you'll notice these are European environmental space targets. Nobody in the US is thinking about environmental space. Maybe it would be too painful, but the governments of the Netherlands, Denmark and Sweden have already worked out what their fair shares allocation of global resources would be. Again, the detail is small there. The headline indicators, though, is the change needed, the percent change needed for, say, for instance, carbon dioxide. It says 77%. This is what we know, 80%, that's what we're aiming at. An increase in 400% in terms of renewables. And incidentally, I will provide a PDF of this presentation so that you can go back and look at it. The message is grim. If by 2050 we want to be living one planet lives, we really are going to have to make some big changes. Certainly the US and the developed world is going to take more of a brunt of that. But again, if we are here to look at campus initiatives to catalyse a just and sustainable world, this is the kind of thing we need to be thinking about. The wildflower meadow on the college lawn is all very good, but this is the hard data that we really need to be grappling with. Second aspect of just sustainability is what's being called spatial justice. The British MP David Lammy says, just as social justice requires that life chances are not distributed along class lines, spatial justice requires that they are not distributed geographically. This is the other side of the tracks argument. This is the, why did those kids that I showed you who live in Roxbury have so little life chance compared to, say, the kids in Watertown or in Cambridge, Massachusetts? Why is that? This is the notion of spatial injustice. And I want to give you a couple of concrete examples of how this might work. Now, this slide I usually use when I'm talking about spatial justice in urban spaces, but I think if we think about campus space, it might work as well. The book there, Rethinking Urban Parks, Public Space and Cultural Diversity, I think makes some very good points. The headline point that they make is, in terms of urban parks, in this new century, we're facing a different kind of threat to public space. Not one of disuse, but of patterns of design and management that exclude some people and reduce social and cultural diversity. A really good point. Think about parks. I was asked 20 years ago when I was doing some consulting work in London to look at a park that was developed 150 years ago, and I was asked, look at this park, tell us what we need to do to it to make it more relevant to the people who are in this park today. So the first thing I looked at was, where do people sit? The benches were all those standard benches, designed around the kind of two adults, 2 children family. And yet I saw extended groups of Asian and Turkish Cypriots, 15, 20 people. Where do they sit? Do the elders sit on the bench and then the younger people sit on the floor? Why don't we develop forum-style seating, reflecting our multicultural and extended family groups that we're using these parks? Again, that's a design issue. It's also an issue of cultural competency. Somebody made the call to put benches in that park that are not still reflective of who is using the park now. Design and space. We need to rethink the way we design space. And we can go further on this. There's an idea in kind of race theory called contact theory, and it says that interracial interactions that occur in leisure settings have the potential to be more genuine and sincere compared with the more obligatory interactions that take place in formal settings. We are diversifying as a nation. If we want a multiculture or an interculture, we're going to have to think about public space and how we can try and design our public spaces to facilitate interaction rather than separation. This has never been more important than now. Never been more important than now, with discussions around, for instance, the Islamic Center at Ground Zero. This has never been more important than now. And let me give you an example. It might seem like a trite example, but I don't think it is. So in the 1980s, environmentalists in Bristol in England persuaded the local parks department to create wildflower meadows. We would all agree that's a good thing. Ecologically, environmentally, it's a good thing. But then somebody noticed they never saw any Indian or African Caribbean people anywhere near the long grass. Why? Fear of snakes. A residual fear of snakes. Even the young kids, the second generation kids, were fearful that the grass might have snakes in it. So an ecologically good idea, wildflower meadow, produced not a social injustice, but produced, a cultural moment, because some people weren't going near these things. How do we deal with that? I don't have an answer for it. I want to see wildflower meadows. But what I'm saying is we need to think about the way we create spaces in urban space and maybe in campus space as well. Let's create spaces that are convivial and that are amenable to bringing people together. Okay, another example of this notion of spatial justice, spatial injustice. I'm a big fan of coffee. This summer I had the pleasure to be sitting in a street in Gothenburg, Sweden, and the view you can see on Södervägen is the view outside Frank's coffee shop. My local coffee shop on Massachusetts Avenue in Cambridge, that's the view you see outside Simon's, my other favorite. So look at Södervägen and look at Massachusetts Avenue. They're roughly the same size streets. But Södervägen is what I call a more spatially just street. There is a broad sidewalk. There is a cycleway. And get this, people don't wear helmets. You know why? Because they don't come into contact with cars. There is then a streetcar system down the middle of the road, and every 30 seconds streetcars are going backwards and forwards. And then there are two lanes, one for private vehicles going one way, one for private vehicles going the other way. The Swedish planners, the Swedish people, have enacted spatial justice on the street. Unlike, say, Massachusetts Avenue, where basically the bigger you are, you have the priority. But in Sweden, that's not the case. If you are a pedestrian, you have many more rights than you have on Massachusetts Avenue. If you are a cyclist, you have many more rights. So this idea of spatial justice, then, I think, is essential to just sustainability. But it doesn't stop there. See what I wrote down there? If the street is our most commonly used public space, and it's been democratized in the way Södervägen has and Massachusetts Avenue hasn't, what does this say to the public who use these streets and spaces daily and become accultured to spatial justice on Södervägen or spatial injustice on Massachusetts Avenue? What does it do to us when we walk out on our street every day and we see this order in Gothenburg, this privileging of rights to public space, and on Massachusetts Avenue we see basically big is best and get out of my way? Especially, what does it say to kids growing up seeing either spatial justice on the street or spatial injustice? Okay, let me just then close by thinking of three ways, as I said at the beginning, three ways I think you can move your campuses towards just sustainability and really to live that ideal that Gandhi set us of being the change that you want to see in the world. We need to reimagine sustainability on campus. You know, if you say sustainable campus, this is what you get. How green is your campus? Solar panels, Croon Hall at Yale, campus recycling. You don't get pictures of people doing outreach, although that does happen. The dominant image of sustainability on campus is greening the campus. We need to change that. We don't need to stop greening the campus, don't get me wrong, we need to live within limits. We need to continue doing that, but we need to also broaden our definition of sustainability to include social equity and justice, and we need to mean it. We need to measure what matters. I was quite surprised, I was very pleasantly surprised. The STARS system has a very good, I think, component of issues related to social justice and equity and diversity. So, if the framework set by AASHE and STARS is going to reward and you get better marks for issues of social justice, diversity, sustainability, then why are indicator programs or bunches of indicators that I've seen on campuses around the country, why are they so environmentally focused? I don't really see any universities that have explicitly social justice indicators. Why is that? Again, I don't know, and I think that's a challenge. I think, you know, you guys need to set your new definition of sustainability, broaden your definition, redefine sustainability, and then measure what matters within that definition. And if social justice and equity are a part of that new mission, then you need to measure issues of social justice and equity on campus. So my class, and this is not Tufts generally, my university was resistant to some of the stuff that came out of my class, but I've just plucked out a few indicators that my Sustainable Communities class developed. Tenure and earnings by ethnicity, average income disparity between highest and lowest paid Tufts community members, number of people who use the counselling centre on an annual basis, the number and frequency of rapes and hate crimes on campus or involving the outside community. These are part of what makes a community sustainable as much as the number of native wildflower meadows or the amount that's being recycled or all of those other good things that you're doing. So we really do, I think, need to measure what matters. Thank you. And finally, the third area then is develop coalitions, both on-campus and off-campus coalitions. On a lot of campuses, there is some really good social justice work going on. But again, just like the sustainability indicators I talked about in cities, it rarely seems to be part of, rarely, but not never, rarely seems to be part of the general effort towards sustainability. One of my students, Barbara Shepherd, did a little bit of research for me before I made this presentation, and she said 11 out of the 21 universities that I highlighted for sustainability action beyond green are involved in some sort of community outreach. These programs attract civic-minded students and add a community service component to a university's reputation. It also allows coalitions to build. And I've made a general point of not mentioning specific institutions, you'll notice in this talk, and I don't want to, but I did find a lot of community outreach potential in organisations. A lot of good organisational work is going on there. But on-campus coalitions as well. You know, working with the, for instance, you know, African American centres or the lesbian, gay, transgendered and bisexual centres. Working across university groups, if you like, because if this movement is really going to work, it has to bring everybody along. Another approach that I have used within my own institution, and it's easier because mine is a professional program, it's a master's program, is that I hired a professor of the practice, Professor Penn Lowe. Penn was director of AASHE, the Alternatives for Community and Environment, which is an environmental justice group in Boston. He's developing for my department a community strategy. And you know that community strategy, what we're doing in it is we're recognizing that for 37 years my department's been running, we've been very good at getting groups to come and present in our classes. It enriches our professional classes if we have somebody from a community group coming in and talking about their work. Usually then they ask for an honorarium, and what do we give them? $100. That's nothing. You can't do anything with that. So we're working on a model now of community credits. If a community group comes in, say 3 times, they get a community credit, they can trade it in for a class in our department. No money changes hands, but real value is exchanged because my students, get the benefit of working in a class with a member of a community. The communities can then cascade that knowledge back in their own communities. So we're really building capacity, really building power within communities. So in closing then, let's just highlight what I've talked about. Just sustainability is about reimagining quality and equality. It's about living within environmental limits. On campus, we should be the change we want to see in the world. We should focus on both environmental quality and human equality. We should model our campus sustainability organisations around just sustainability, like that organisation, Urban Ecology in Oakland. We should reimagine sustainability, broaden our definition to include social justice and equity, and we should measure what matters in terms of whole campus well-being, not just the greenness of our campus. And finally, we should develop coalitions with groups both on and off campus. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Julian, for your thought-provoking and insightful address, and thanks for helping us reframe our thinking about what we do and what we need to do, and for challenging us both within AASHE and at our campus level to take some action that we'll be able to come back at the next conference and talk about what we're doing. So thank you. Julian will be signing books in the lobby area just outside of the ballroom here, so it'll be straight across from the doors. He'll be there in a few minutes, and we'll be there to sign books and take questions from you. I have a few announcements before we break. There will be a coffee-tea break in that reception area just outside our doors, and our next concurrent sessions start at 9:30. If you are going to one of the lunch meetings, please go up to the expo first and pick up one of the grab-and-go lunches and bring it down to your lunch meeting. Also, if you go to the AASHE Pavilion up in the expo, you're invited to pick up a free copy of the 2010 Climate Neutral Campus Report that's hot off the presses. This year, AASHE and USGBC collaborated with Kyoto Press to produce an exciting and informative collection of papers, and I would encourage you to take one home with you. Well, have a wonderful day. We'll see you back here at 7 o'clock for our awards dinner. Thanks.